health disorders that are associated directly with the Chernobyl radiation. There was an increase in death and prevalence of these following groups of diseases. Circulatory system, and that's because of the radioactive destruction of the internal lining of the blood vessels, basically. The endocrine system, especially non-malignant thyroid problems. Immune system, they called it Chernobyl AIDS secretly and didn't tell us. An increased incident and seriousness of all illnesses, basically. Respiratory system, urogenital tract, reproductive disorders, musculoskeletal system, that includes the pathologic changes in structure and composition of bones, porosis, osteoporosis. Central nervous system, frontal, temporal, occipital lobes of the brain, leading to diminished intelligence, strange behavior, and mental disorders. Eyes, cataracts, refraction anomalies, congenitive or conjunctive disorders. Digestive tract, could be a lot of things. Congenital malformations and anomalies, including mysteriously rare multiple defects of limbs and heads. Thyroid cancer. All forecasts concerning this cancer have been wrong. Chernobyl-related thyroid cancers have rapid onset and aggressive development, striking both children and adults equally. After surgery, the person becomes dependent on the replacement hormone medication for the rest of their life. Leukemia, so blood cancers, again, not only in children and liquidators, but in the general adult population of contaminated territories, and other malignant neoplasms, lots of stuff. Other health consequences this caused: changes in the body's biological balance, leading to increased numbers of serious illnesses owing to intestinal toxicities, bacterial infections, and sepsis. Intensified infectious and parasitic diseases, so like viral hepatitis, respiratory viruses, the interesting new apocalypse virus I've been telling you about. Increased incidence of health disorders in children born to radiated parents. So this is people who weren't in the area, and even individuals who left the contaminated territories, especially those radiated while in utero. So anyone who was pregnant, of course, passed that on. These disorders involving practically all the body's organs, all the body systems, including genetic changes. Catastrophic state of health of liquidators, now especially the ones who worked in that area, 1986, 1987. Premature aging found in all adults and all children. Increased incidence of multiple somatic and genetic mutations. Chernobyl actually enriched the medical vocabulary, believe it or not, with such terms as cancer rejuvenescence, as well as new syndromes, believe it or not. Vegetovascular dystopia, if you believe it. Dysfunctional regulation of the nervous system, including cardiovascular and other organs, also called autonomic nervous system dysfunction, with clinical signs that present against a background of stress. Incorporated long-life radionuclides, functional and structural disorders of cardiovascular, nervous, endocrine, reproductive, and other systems owing to said observed radionucleotides. This other one, acute inhalation lesions of the upper respiratory tract. A combination of a scratchy nose, itchy throat, dry cough, difficulty breathing, shortening of breath, owing to the inhaling of these nucleotides, including hot particles. Several other new, completely unheard of syndromes reflected in increased instances of some illness appeared right after Chernobyl as well. Chronic fatigue syndrome. And again, expressive and unrelieved fatigue, fatigue without obvious cause, periodic depression, memory loss, diffuse muscular and joint pains, chills and fevers, frequent mood changes, cervical lymph node sensitivity, weight loss. It is also associated with immune system dysfunction and CNS disorders. Lingering radiation illness syndrome. That's a combination of excessive fatigue, dizziness, trembling, back pain. Early aging syndrome. Divergence between physical and chronological age with the illness characteristics of elderly occurring at an early age. Specific syndromes such as radiation in utero, Chernobyl AIDS, Chernobyl hearts, Chernobyl limbs, and others await to be more detailed and definite medical definitions, I guess. But the deterioration of public health, especially in children, in the Chernobyl contaminated territories 23 years after the catastrophe is not due to psychological stress, radiophobia, or from resettlement. It is mostly and primarily due to the being irradiated. Other than the first powerful shock in 1986, there is continual chronic low-dose rate nucleotide exposure. Psychological factors, radiation phobia, simply have no bearing on pathologies here, because death continued to increase for some years after the catastrophe. And I remember hearing about this radiation phobia thing. Even though the radiation concerns have decreased, people are still dying. Infections on the rise. There's evidence of increased incidence and severity of diseases characterized by intestinal toxins, bacterial sepsis, viral hepatitis, respiratory viruses in areas contaminated by Chernobyl. Genetic instability has increased in the contaminated territories as well, and resulted in increased sensitivity to virus and other types of infection. Chernobyl children. Whether activation or dispersion of dangerous infections is due to mutational changes in microorganisms, impaired immunological defenses, populations, combination of both, has not been answered even to this day. 1 gram of soil contains some 2,500,000,000 microorganisms, so bacteria, microfungi, protozoa, and up to 3 kilograms of mass of an adult body is made up of bacteria, viruses, and microfungi. In spite of the fact that these represent such an important and fundamental live ecosystems here, there's only scarce data on the various microbiological consequences of that disaster. There's been activation of retroviruses not seen for decades on our planet. Tuberculosis has become more virulent in more contaminated areas of, well, Belarus, definitely. 1993, 1997, hepatitis viruses B, C, and D, and G became noticeably activated in heavily contaminated areas, Belarus again. Hepatitis viruses were activated in heavily contaminated Belarus 6 to 7 years after the catastrophe. Among soil bacteria, the most actively accumulated one is again that C137. Sharp reduction in the abundance of healthy gut bacteria, prevalence of microbes of toxicants in particular, and a sharp increase in E. coli has been noted in the intestines of evacuee children now living in the Ukraine. All microorganisms, so viruses, bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and microbiological communities as a whole, undergo rapid changes after any additional irradiation. The mechanism of such changes is well known: inclusion and increase in frequency of mutations by natural selection, they're still using that, and preservation of beneficial novel genes that, for whatever reason, appear to be more viable under these new dangerous conditions. This microevolutionary mechanism that we're seeing here has been activated in all of the areas, which is most of the world, from that one. It leads to an activation of very old and the occurrence of new forms of viruses and bacteria. All but a few of the microorganisms that have been studied in Chernobyl affected territories underwent rapid changes in all the heavily contaminated areas. Our knowledge is too limited to understand all of the consequences here of the induced genetic changes among all of the myriad of viruses and bacteria and protozoa and fungi that inhabit our intestines, our lungs, blood, organs, all the cells of the human beings. Strong association between carcinogenesis and viruses, like Epstein-Barr, many others, provides a reason why cancer rate increased in all the contaminated areas, but there was a spike all over the world of cancer since then. And not only cancer, but many other diseases, illnesses, connected with viruses and bacteria specifically. All of these changes in all our microflora in humans can increase susceptibility to infections, inflammatory diseases of bacterial, viral, so influenza, chronic intestinal diseases, all kinds of stuff, asthma, and other various pathologies of pregnancy, unfortunately. The long-term consequences for this microbe, it may be but just far worse than we're understanding. So, a note here on environmental consequences. Now, realize I am quoting to you from scientific research that was written all over this planet, not just by one source, but by many. This is not speculation. This has already happened. All of the initial forecasts of rapid clearance or decay of radionucleotides from Chernobyl from ecosystems were wrong. It is now known that they are taking much longer than predicted to just disappear. I don't know if they thought there's some magic fairy wand was going to go over them. But the overall state of contamination in the water, in the air, and the soil appears to fluctuate greatly. The dynamics of all of these poisonous materials still present surprises to the scientists that are looking as a result of the accumulation